Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands and Ghost Recon Breakpoint are the two most recent games in the series. Wildlands is the older of the two, released in 2017, and Breakpoint 2 years later in 2019. In this video we're going to compare all aspects of these two games and assess their strengths and weaknesses to find out which is better and therefore which you should buy, as this is a somewhat controversial topic, so stick around till the end to hear my verdict. Now first let's take a look at the stories, as this is really the backbone of these types of games and it will give you some good context for the rest of the video. I'll keep this brief to avoid spoilers, but Ghost Recon Wildlands is set in Bolivia and your goal is to dismantle the drug cartel. You have to work your way through all aspects of their operation, with your final target being the drug lord El Sueño. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, on the other hand, the newer game, takes a very different approach to its storyline. In this game you crash land on a futuristic dystopian island where technology is beginning to take over. The antagonist here is Cole Walker, who leads a rebellion group that's using technology in all the wrong ways. Now both of these storylines have potential, although in practice I found the drug cartel in Wildlands to be far more intriguing, but we'll get onto that in more detail later. In terms of gameplay, well, the mechanical experience and feel of the two games is rather similar, although there are some pretty significant upgrades in Breakpoint. The general gunplay was good in Wildlands, but it's taken a nice step up in Breakpoint with a great overall feel due to its improved fluidity. Most of the animations feel slick in both games, although I personally find the movement to be a bit clunky. This does apply to both titles, although Breakpoint puts you in tight indoor spaces far more often than Wildlands does, so it's far more noticeable in that game. Something Breakpoint does do far better than Wildlands though is its gameplay customization. While you can change your difficulty in Wildlands, Breakpoint takes this to a whole new level, with far more in-depth options allowing you to truly choose what kind of experience you want. You can actually change some pretty significant aspects of the game, such as turning off gear score, the rather hated gun level system, and turning off the also much hated drones. Now I feel like these options were mainly added to address common complaints about the game, although it's really nice to have the customization. This customization allows you to set up your game for ultimate realism with hyper-aware enemies and no HUD, or for instance you can move towards a setup that's better for just going in guns blazing. Sticking with personalization, gun and character customization is strong in both games, with ample options for you to add your own touch to your player and their weapons. Somehow though, Wildlands ends up with more options for character customization, and the reason for this is completely beyond me, as it's the older game. AI teammates also add massively to the gameplay experience in both titles. You get 3 AI controlled buddies to help you through missions. They can take out enemies, revive you, and you can sync up with them to take out a group of hostiles at the same time. The teammates are great in both games, although this is yet another area where Breakpoint one-ups Wildlands. In Breakpoint you have way more control over them, being able to customize them down to their weapons, which can affect how they play. The teammates in Breakpoint also seem to be more intelligent and require less guidance from the player. I also found that in Wildlands they would occasionally break my cover, which can be very annoying. Now while we're on teammates, you do have the option in both games to play online co-op. You can matchmake publicly or play with your friends, and this can be a load of fun, although Breakpoint once again takes this to another level with Ghost War, its own PvP multiplayer mode. It's not exactly great, and I can't call it original either. You play in a pretty standard small team format on a few decently sized maps. While the mode isn't particularly great, it can be fun and at least has potential if it gets updated. And by the way, Breakpoint is still being regularly updated, whereas Wildlands is of course not, as it's the older game. The open worlds in these two games are great, at least in most ways. Bolivia is depicted beautifully in Wildlands, and while it does have a really good variety of landscapes, Breakpoint's island, Aurora, has to take the crown for this. There's everything from mountains to swamps and tropical jungle. Breakpoint's map is also slightly larger, and while this sounds great, it really didn't need to be, as the map size does actually hurt the game in other areas. Due to its size, missions are often very far apart in Breakpoint, which means you spend far too long just in helicopters going from A to B. Fast travel is available through the bivouac feature, which are small camps dotted around the map. To be able to fast travel though, you have to already have visited that location, and when you get there, you're often in the middle of nowhere. Now, the map in Wildlands isn't that much smaller, so you'd at least expect it to have some sort of a similar problem, but funnily enough, that isn't actually the case. In some sort of reverse evolution, the older game has a solution to this problem. The map is split into provinces in Wildlands, and each one has a significant target. This means that all of your missions leading up to taking out that target will be in that area, which makes a whole lot of sense and also solves the helicopter problem. Another big difference between the maps are NPCs. In Wildlands there are loads of cars on the road and people walking about towns. Now while there are NPCs in Breakpoint, there are far fewer of them, and for me this just had a huge impact on the atmosphere of the game. I played Breakpoint first and then played Wildlands, and the first thing I realised was just how dead Breakpoint felt, but how alive, bustling and realistic Wildlands seemed. Breakpoint's futuristic island is also full of all this modern architecture, which looked cool at first, but I found it to get quite repetitive and bland. Now, maybe it is your cup of tea, but I found the more realistic rural villages and towns of Wildlands to be far more immersive and interesting to explore. In terms of graphics, Breakpoint is a pretty decent upgrade over Wildlands, although it's nothing more than a generational improvement that we would expect, and I'll have a good graphical comparison linked in the description if you want some more info. Now, so far the two games have been trading blows pretty equally, although it's when it comes to the missions that one of them falls apart very quickly. Now, I'm sad to say that it is in fact Breakpoint. While the developers have worked very hard to improve aspects of the game that people criticised, the missions aren't really something that can be given a big overhaul post-launch. The main story of the game is just repetitive and sticks to one main format for more than 80% of the time. You get a lead which takes you to a person, you spend 5 minutes in that damn helicopter to get to the person, interrogate them, learn about a base, which you then have to clear for some reason. Now, this mission format is fine. In fact, with the gunplay being so strong, having a lot of base clearing could be fun. There is, however, a difference between quite a lot of base clearing and just, oh my god, that's way too much. And while this is a subjective matter, in my opinion, it's the oh my god, this is way too much here. The story does also contribute to the negative experience here, as for me it was dragged out way too long, with base clearing once again. Thankfully the repetitiveness is saved by other elements of the game. The gunplay, as I already mentioned, but also the map. Now, I did complain about some elements of Breakpoint's map, but what I did praise was its diversity, and this does at least allow for missions to feel unique and novel when you're exploring a cool new area. Now, not all missions are in this format, but most are, so if you're going to choose Breakpoint, then prepare yourself for some base clearing, followed by some base clearing, followed by a bit more base clearing. Wildlands, on the other hand, is a rather different story, and another example of some sort of reverse evolution. Yes, there is base clearing here, and there should be, because it can be a lot of fun, but it doesn't take up 80% of the missions this time. There's hostage situations, convoys, stealing planes, and recon. And in one of the missions which I absolutely loved, you had to steal an enemy's truck and swap it out for an identical one full of C4. All without being seen, while also under a time limit. Now don't get me wrong, Breakpoint has some really good and memorable missions, some of which are on the level of, or better than the ones I love from Wildlands, but these felt like a few needles in a haystack of base clearing for me. While we're on positive elements of Wildlands, I also wanted to mention the side missions, as these really stood out to me. Most of the side missions are part of an effort to help the rebel forces, who are also fighting the cartel. In return, they'll help you, as doing these missions unlocks commands, such as being able to call in vehicle drop-offs or directing mortar fire. Completing more missions can level up the command, so by endgame you'll be able to call in helicopters and have a large group of rebels fighting alongside you. Now, if you're wondering about Breakpoint's side missions, I have two words for you: base and clearing. Overall, I could recommend both of these games pretty confidently to most people. Having said that, I believe that Wildlands is the better game by quite a margin, for most people at least. It seems that a lot of others agree too, as in a poll where I asked 650 people which game they preferred, 78% said Wildlands. Wildlands has a great map, great customization and great missions, and while yes, Breakpoint has improved on it in many areas, Breakpoint's repetitive missions and dull story are really its downfall. The other problem for Breakpoint is actually Wildlands. Wildlands was so good that it set the bar very high, and if I'm honest, I think this has made it sound and feel like a worse game than it actually is. Now, 78% is absolutely the majority, however, more than 1 in 5 still said Breakpoint, and I think I know why. Breakpoint has definitely improved since launch, and props to the developers for that. However, it's the gameplay customization that Wildlands can't even compete with. Breakpoint allows you to create a pretty realistic experience if you want, so for those who want a really hardcore stealth game, this is the one to go for. Breakpoint's fluidity and its gunplay is also noticeably better than Wildlands. Anyway, that's all for this video. Let me know what you think of this topic in the comments. If you found the video useful, then a like or even a sub would be absolutely amazing. But that's all, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.